Finland, Denmark, Norway and Sweden. For many, they are the so-called near-perfect nations. After all, it is Sweden and Norway where the Nobel Prizes are given. And of course, the Scandinavian nations have even been regarded as the happiest one. But for the poor and developing nations, will blindly following the Scandinavian nations without any critical examination guarantee prosperity and happiness? And even more importantly, some countries may have been labeled as unhappy or poor, but does that mean that the poor are not allowed to question their rich?
Point number 1. Environmental abuse. In Denmark, they boast that Copenhagen received the European Green Capital Award for 2014, and in 2018, the Swedish government agency even tweeted, "The Öresund Bridge forms the perfect backdrop for an evening swim." But do they also want us to know that between 2014 and 2018, in this iconic location, Denmark dumped a mind-boggling 35 billion liters of wastewater, including thousands of tons of human excrement? If Denmark dumps raw sewage in this iconic place, then Norway also dumps millions of tons of toxic mining waste in its iconic fjords. Annelin Tingnes Forsund refers to this as Norway's dirty secret and states, waste dumping in fjords makes Norway an environmental hypocrite. But what can you really expect from one of the most oil-dependent economies like Norway, which seems to pose as the world's environmental moral police, but its own prosperity and its famous social welfare model financially depends on heavily polluting fossil fuel extraction? David Boyd states, major oil producers like Norway are fueling the global climate emergency and contributing to a wide range of human rights violations across the planet. But no matter how fragile the ecosystem of the Arctic may be, Norway doesn't want to stop, and it seems that this hypocrisy is even being noticed by these scientists. As far as Finland's environmental crimes are concerned, it was reported that waste from Finland is also illegally exported to other countries, apart from the illegal dumping that takes place inside Finland's borders. A former prosecutor specializing in environmental crimes stated, "It's easy to dump things in this country because there is so much space." Besides all this, can we ignore the terrible performance of these nations when it comes to consumption-based emissions? No matter how much these nations glorify themselves, and no matter how cleverly they promote the environmental indexes whose methodologies suit them, at the end of the day, can we ignore the fact that if everyone lived the lifestyle that these Scandinavians do, we would require these many Earths? Can we afford to follow the lifestyle of these Scandinavians? What torture would that be to our planet? Point number 2. Animal abuse. No, it is not about the fact that the so-called environment-loving Scandinavian countries have some of the highest meat consumption in the world. It is about something else. While many humans were busy admiring and applauding Denmark for being the happiest country in 2013, many animals were perhaps crying in Denmark's animal brothels, and many animals were the victims of Denmark's animal sex tourism. In Norway, 22% of the veterinarians who participated in this survey suspected or were certain that an animal they had treated had been sexually abused. In Denmark, this was 17%. Sweden, Norway and Denmark took steps to change their laws, but it was reported that in Finland, bestiality continued to remain legal. Minna Rutsalo referred to this as shameful and stated that in Finland, the majority of cases remain in the dark. But can the change in law also change people's mentality? And are the punishments harsh enough? For example, in Norway in February 2021, it was reported how in the largest case concerning sexual relations with animals, the punishment for these perpetrators was a financial penalty. How shocking is that? Reacting to that, Norway's largest NGO for animals stated, "This gives a clear picture of how little value the animals still have in the Norwegian legal system." But should one really hope for miracles from Norway, a country which has even objected to the global ban on commercial whaling and has killed more than 14,000 minke whales, many of whom were even pregnant? You may be heartbroken by the brutality of the procedure to kill whales. The industry has even been regarded as inherently cruel. But is there anyone who can stop Norway? Not only that, did you know that these Scandinavian countries are also home to the cruel fur industry and have been among the biggest producers of fur in the world, killing millions of innocent animals every year? In Denmark, in 2020, the inevitable death of these poor fur-producing animals arrived a bit too early, as the country decided to kill up to 17 million minks, fearing the spread of COVID-19, an astonishing number that is nearly thrice that of Denmark's human population. Point number 3. Human rights abuse, persecution and discrimination of the indigenous people. Isn't it a cruel irony that on the one hand, Sweden and Norway are involved in awarding Nobel Prizes, and on the other hand, they are also referred to as colonial states? Did anyone ever tell you that this massive land, which was inhabited by the Sami people and is known as Sapmi, was seized or taken by some of the nations who have become our role models for human rights today? But what happened to the indigenous Sami people? Well, in Sweden, the Sami were dispossessed from their land. Their children were taken to special schools where they were stripped of their culture and made to feel ashamed of their people and were forced not to speak in their own language. The persecution of these indigenous inhabitants in Sweden was extremely horrific. Forced conversion to Christianity, burning of their sacred drums in violation of their sacred sites, even the death penalty for those who did not give up their traditional beliefs. In Norway, it wasn't just about converting Samis to Christianity. It was forbidden to sell land to anyone who could not speak Norwegian, and teachers were instructed to restrict the use of the Sami language in the schools. In the so-called happiest nation, Finland, the religious culture of Sami people underwent violent changes in connection with Christian missionizing, and even today, the oppression or discrimination of Sami people hasn't ended. Yes, even in present times, in Finland, Sami people face intolerance, hate speech, and racist writings. Many cannot act, move, or pursue their livelihoods without fear of being bullied or threatened. According to Clemeti Naklijärvi, former chairman of the Sami parliament in Finland, it is difficult to live as a Sami in your own homeland. This inhuman treatment of Samis can also be observed in Sweden, where it has been reported that many of them face frequent verbal abuse, even today. This includes discrimination or attacks in medical care facilities, employment offices, during employment interviews, in the housing market, and even in Swedish schools. In Norway, a study even showed that those with the strongest Sami affiliation were 10 times more likely to have experienced ethnic discrimination than the ethnic Norwegian majority. And as far as Denmark is concerned, how can we forget the brutality that the indigenous peoples of Greenland, the Inuit, have faced in their own land? It has been reported how in Greenland, Denmark pursued a so-called civilizing mission, including forced conversions to Christianity and the suppression of language and traditions. Read these accounts to familiarize yourself with the humiliation and insults that Greenlandic Inuit face even today. Point number 4. Racism, fascism, forced sterilizations, Nazi links and Nordic secularism. It should be noted that oppression or discrimination is not only limited to Sami people or Greenlandic Inuit. For example, in Norway, can we ignore the horror of the Norwegianization that Quen people have gone through? And in Sweden, can we ignore what many Jewish, Swedish Finnish, Tornedalian and Roma go through even today? Go through these words. This degrading verbal abuse that these school-going children face in Sweden is absolutely heartbreaking. And yes, this type of nightmare exists in Norwegian schools too. This study mentions how in Norway, the whiteness is part of national identification, but this has largely been silenced. And as far as Finland is concerned, many Jews, Roma, Somali people and even Russian-speaking minorities face discrimination, racism, abuse or insults in their day-to-day lives. In particular, the brutality that Roma in these Nordic nations have faced can easily bring you to tears. To assimilate Roma into the Finnish population, Roma children were frequently separated from their parents and their language was banned. And in Norway, under a racial purity program, hundreds of Roma women were sterilized. Yes, Can we ignore the fact that for the purpose of racial purity, thousands of women were sterilized against their will in Finland and thousands of forced abortions were carried out too? Or how about Sweden, where approved by the state until 1976, around 60,000 people were sterilized under a racial purity program so that they could not have children? And don't be surprised, while this bone-chilling horror show was taking place in these countries, the ceremonies to award the Nobel Prizes or the Nobel Peace Prize were taking place too, as if the nations of Sweden and Norway are the moral superpowers of the world. But can awarding a Nobel Prize to others fix the horrific problems in your own backyard? As for these nations' love for secularism and multiculturalism, consider this. As of May 2021, some Nordic nations continue to have an official state church or give a special status in legislation to the Lutheran Church. In other words, there is a clear advantage to Christianity and, precisely speaking, an advantage to just one Christian denomination. How shocking is that? And as far as freedom of religious expression is concerned, in Norway, even the king's religious freedom seems compromised. Read Article 4 of the Norwegian Constitution. And of course, don't forget to check their public holidays. For instance, take a look at Sweden's public holidays. Christian, Christian, Christian. But why is that? Do only Christians live in Scandinavia? But are these facts really that surprising for nations where many people suffer from Islamophobia? Or how about the plight of the people of African descent in Scandinavia? A 2018 report from the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights found that the so-called happiest nation, Finland, was among the most racist countries among the 12 surveyed nations of Europe. And as far as fascism and Nazi links are concerned, how about the friendly relations with Nazi Germany? Or how about the comments made by IKEA founder Ingvar Kamprad on the Swedish fascist leader Per Engdahl? Do you want to ignore this? Number 5. Child sex tourism and sexual abuse against women. It may break your heart to know this, but Nordic nations are also a source of child sex tourists who abuse children in other countries. For example, it was revealed that between 4,000 and 5,000 purchases of sexual services from minors by Swedes occur abroad every year. In Estonia, a survey was done on adult sex workers and some underage girls exploited in prostitution. It revealed that among all sex buyers who were of foreign origin, there were more buyers from Finland than any other country. And no, it is not only about the sex crimes that many Scandinavians commit abroad. Take a look at what is happening within these countries. 71% of women in Finland have experienced sexual harassment. In Denmark, 80%, and in Sweden, 81%. This survey revealed that 11% of Swedish women have been victims of attempted rape. And the study concluded that almost 10% of women in Norway had been raped at least once in their lifetime. Not only that, half of them were raped before they even reached the age of 18. But the nightmare doesn't end here. Massive underreporting, victim shaming, poor prosecution rate, poor conviction rate. Of course, the horror continues. Number 6. Rigid social hierarchy, modern slavery, and something that may be regarded as the Western caste system. According to researcher Minna Toivonen in Finland, cleaning work has a somewhat bad reputation and native Finns are not willing to accept cleaning jobs. This study mentions that in Sweden, cleaning or char work constitutes one of the lowest working class positions in society. Cleaners are at the bottom of the hierarchy, below owners and other white-collar workers in the industry. And this study mentions that many Norwegians are lazy. They'd rather go to the welfare services than take a job cleaning. The study also mentions how in Norway, cleaning work is perceived as low status, dirty work, it is devalued. Within this logic, cleaning is positioned as an immigrant job. Of course, the presence of immigrant cleaners has made sure that the toilets of these Nordic nations continue to shine. In the Swedish cleaning industry, almost 50% of the workforce was born abroad, and an unknown number of undocumented immigrants are working informally. And these two studies reveal that even the legal migrants and highly educated foreign students who come to these countries for higher studies end up trapped in cleaning jobs. There are also cases when these immigrant cleaners are blackmailed or exploited as their employers confiscate their passports or other identity documents. It appears that at the very bottom of the hierarchy are the undocumented immigrant cleaners. As far as Sweden is concerned, what they can go through has even been described as halfway to hell. Just notice the wage difference, as well as grave human rights violations, wage theft, and severe labor exploitation. Is this the Nordic model that they brag about? Number 7. Alcohol intoxication, drug abuse, and depression in the so-called happy Nordic nations. In Nordic nations, alcohol abuse often starts in childhood. In Denmark, 43% of students report alcohol use at the age of 13 or younger. In Finland, it is 24%. And as far as alcohol overdose is concerned, 11% of Danish students aged 13 or younger reported alcohol intoxication. In Finland, the figure is 7.4%. Substance abuse and the use of hardcore illicit drugs is widespread among children in these countries, and that addiction and abuse often continues into adulthood. For example, take a look at the drug-induced mortality rate of European countries. Pay attention to the terrible performance of the Scandinavian countries. In particular, take a look at Sweden, which has the European Union's second highest rate of drugs-related deaths. Mind you, even if we avoid cross-country comparisons to rule out the inconsistency in methodologies, we can't ignore Sweden's own national data, which shows that the mortality rate is higher than it was in 2006. Yes, Sweden has a big problem with drugs, and it can't afford to be in denial. Now I will focus on depression and the usage of antidepressants. Many claim that the Nordic nations' high depression rate and high antidepressant usage is only due to better mental health awareness and better access to healthcare. Now let's explore how hollow that claim is. To start with, it is quite a paradox that in the so-called happiest nation, Finland, which has a population of just around 5.5 million, an overwhelming number of 430,000 people were reported to be taking antidepressants. Not only that, despite all the claims of the public's good mental health awareness, it was reported that many depressed people in Finland do not even come forward to get help. And there are many who want to get help, but unfortunately can't get the help that they need. In Finland, waiting times for hospital treatments can last several months. And please note that I'm talking about the times before the coronavirus pandemic, when hospitals were not supposed to be overburdened. In addition, many in Finland who suffer from depression can't even afford psychotherapy, which is more expensive. Yes, you heard that right. It has been reported that many Finns are left with their depression untreated. And just in case you didn't know, KELA, which is Finnish government's social insurance institution, doesn't reimburse everything that patients spend. You can read that right here on your screen. As a result, in Finland, many seem to have no choice but to take antidepressants in the hope of curing themselves. But that is not everything. There is more that is happening in these Nordic nations. Rising cases of ADHD in children, overprescription or inappropriate usage of psychostimulant drugs or antidepressants, drug poisoning, and many other serious issues. Number 8. Slave trade, colonial brutality, and the brilliant marketing and packaging of Nordic nations. According to the former Prime Minister of Denmark, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, many of Copenhagen's beautiful houses and palaces were built with money earned of the toil of slaves and exploitation on the other side of the world. But it was not only about the economic exploitation. They even converted thousands of their slaves to Christianity, crushing or suppressing their native religions and cultures so that the slaves could be exploited better or become more obedient. No, we can't ignore the atrocities or exploitation that took place in the Dano-Norwegian colonies, which were spread throughout many parts of the world, including Africa and even India. And as far as the Scandinavians' participation in the slave trade is concerned, did you know that it is estimated that about 120,000 enslaved Africans were transported by Danish ships to the Caribbean? In Denmark's colonial empire, enslaved Africans were auctioned to the highest bidder. And just in case you are curious to know what this picture is, it is a force-feeding instrument used on slaves who went on a hunger strike. But despite all this, Nordic nations seem to be extremely image conscious and put in a lot of effort to maintain their self-image. For example, the study mentions how in the light of their self-image, the Nordic nations' pursuit of colonial dominion and their contribution to the colonial efforts of other nations were routinely written out of the national histories of the Nordic countries. According to the Swedish journalist Maciej Zaremba, most signs of 40 years of forced sterilization have disappeared from school and history books. But can biased history books or school curriculums help any nation to run away from the truth? And if yes, then for how long can anyone maintain their self-glorified image? Did you know that Sweden has pumped millions into efforts that are designed to work on its image abroad? Did you know that the Swedish Institute, a government agency, has been working to promote interest and trust in Sweden around the world since 1945? This government agency has approximately 470 million Swedish government funds. Not only that, it was also revealed that the Swedish Travel and Tourism Council helps organize some 600 journalist visits a year, which result in some 6,000 articles. Yes, 600 journalists and 6,000 articles just for Sweden. How does that sound to you? Number 9. The Nordic social welfare model and surveys that attempt to study or measure happiness or subjective well-being. The so-called Nordic welfare model seems to be full of severe defects. Not only that, it is also misused or abused by many residents of these nations. For example, on the one hand, thousands of migrant cleaners are brutally exploited within the Nordic nations, and on the other hand, many Scandinavian parents enjoy the financial benefits of the welfare model by even faking kids' sick leave. The money earned from fossil fuel sales has pumped the Norwegian social welfare model, but it has also contributed to underemployment. It was reported that the former finance minister of Norway said, approximately 600,000 Norwegians who should be part of the labor force are outside the labor force because of welfare pension issues. Yes, you may have heard a lot of self-glorification of the Nordic model. Now please hold your seats and listen to the healthcare system horror of the so-called happiest Scandinavian countries. The Swedish Cancer Society reported, men who suffer from high-risk prostate cancer have to wait an average of 167 days to get treatment. Yes, months of waiting for something as serious as cancer. Is that the Nordic model that they brag about? In Norway, waiting times for dental treatment have even been reported to be as long as 4 years. Yes, you heard it right, more than 1,000 days of waiting. Now consider this. Knee replacement surgery waiting times. Finland, 117 days. Sweden, 101 days. Norway, 160 days. Hip replacement waiting times. Norway, 134 days. Finland, 99 days. Cataract surgery waiting times. Denmark, 63 days. Finland, 103 days. Norway, 129 days. And of course, I must mention that in Finland, you can wait weeks for even a simple consultation with a doctor. This terrible situation at home means that many Scandinavians have no choice but go to countries like Estonia and Hungary to seek medical treatment, of course, all thanks to the Nordic model. Among the various public institutions in these nations which have serious shortcomings, there is one institution that is worth mentioning, and that is the Norwegian Child Protection Service, Barnevernet. Did you know that because of Barnevernet, Norway has been convicted multiple times in relation to child welfare cases in the European Court of Human Rights? Yes, human rights violations by a government agency in Norway. This may all sound very horrific, but so far in this episode I have only scratched the surface. What lies underneath or hidden in these countries is probably beyond your imagination. But then, this brings us the question. With all these problems, how come many Scandinavians self-evaluate their lives so highly in the survey cited in the World Happiness Report? Do Scandinavians have a culture of denial? Or does their ignorance lead to their bliss or satisfaction? Or are there some other reasons? We must study and explore that more. It seems pretty clear that the World Happiness Report hasn't been able to measure all of the shortcomings of the Nordic model, and that is why it becomes even more important to understand the methodology of such types of survey-based studies. And before we do that, we shouldn't forget that a methodology that is designed by Westerners can only reflect the Western perspective of happiness. I should also point out that the World Happiness Report is not the only one that attempts to study subjective well-being. For example, the World Values Survey is a global research project that asks a direct question about happiness to respondents in various countries. And this survey shows that Indians are happier than people in Germany or in many other Western nations. This survey also shows that people in Uzbekistan and Malaysia are happier than people in Sweden. But will a Nordic nation like Sweden want to promote or popularize the results of this report? Can such results help these Western nations in creating a glorified shiny image or in maintaining the Western leadership of the world? Probably by now you already have the answer. As a well-wisher of these countries and as a citizen of the European Union, I am very concerned. See you again.